All right. Now let's make a killer transition to YARA rules. And I mean, basically malware plays that when you're too noisy and aggressive. And, when you're trying to break it apart, that's the takeaway from this image. And usually when we talk about anti-sandbox detection, we think about VTIs. And that's still true, but this time YARA rules give us a hand too, and help us catch some anti-sandbox tricks directly. Now we will talk about. And we just added new YARA rules targeting behaviors in two malware families that we observed that have been pretty loud. One is Latrodectus and the other is hijack loader. I'm going to start with Latrodectus here. So it checks how many processes are running before it executes. So if it is on Windows 10 or 11, it needs at least 75 active processes. And if it is on Windows 8 or older, it needs 50. And if it doesn't find enough, it just shuts down. And Patrick, I would like to say, how cool is that, using YARA to catch anti-sandbox checks? And I know you've done some digging into the Latrodectus loader, this family. So I would like to hear your take on it.
Yeah, we've taken a closer look into that load in the past, and I think this is a very interesting technique on how they are trying to figure out whether they're running inside a sandbox or not. Just basically imagine that when you have a real user system, or a system that is actually used by a real world user, then you usually have a couple of different applications open, right? You have Chrome, you maybe have your mail client, you have Word, Excel, whatever you basically do, some applications running here and there. And then, of course, all of them need some processes that are running in the background. And when it comes to sandboxes, well, it always depends on how they're being built and how they're being prepared and how much effort you basically put into trying to make them resistant against evasion techniques. One of the goals that all should have in common is trying to let it look like it is a real world environment, or real environment is used by a user. And that's, of course, also the reason, and I think Latrodectus really also highlights that as well, how important it is to mimic this environment. And of course, the more background process you have running, the more legitimate it looks like. And that's, of course, also what we do. And the nice on top of that is that we are also, of course, trying to catch this sort of behavior with YARA signatures. So it's, even though YARA is a signature, basically, you can still try to match on patterns and code patterns to try finding this sort of logic there. I guess Tony maybe also has some additional insights and points on that to add here.
Yeah, with Latrodactus, it's been interesting to see how some of these malware families have adapted to the times. Uh, Many of you have probably seen the click fix or paste and run fake CAPTCHA campaigns that have been going in the wild. They have been going in the wild very solidly with a high volume, high prevalence since probably last November. And various malware families at various points have adopted that sort of distribution method, or adversaries distributing the malware have adopted them. And Latrodectus is one that has adopted it very, very well in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And I loved seeing new additional YARA rules to kind of help get together, figure out what those capabilities are to point to Latrodectus, because as we'll kind of talk about here, and as you'll find out as you go through and see more of this malware in the wild, those capability YARA rules will help you find newer versions as you start finding newer versions of Latrodectus. Maybe your old rules don't work, but the capability ones can still work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also interesting because, of course, you can track Latrodectus itself, but it's also often interesting if you maybe see that this YARA is also matching maybe in a completely different family, that other threat actors or whatever script kiddies that you have there building the stuff in the background are also trying to adopt those techniques because they maybe picked them up somewhere, they read something about that. And I think YARA is also pretty good for that, to basically use it in that case to continue your tracking purpose.